Hey everyone, this is Emil here for episode 120 of DoubleDM podcast. Right, today we're talking about making combats close and creating nail-biting experiences in combat. As we said last episode, Niels is on vacation right now, so there is not gonna be a recap of our usual weeks of what we do in TTRPGs right now, because Niels is on vacation and chilling on a beach in Greece somewhere. Speaking of Greece, this is not going to make sense for anyone but Niels and maybe the DoubleDM team itself. As for our actual play, so God, this is going to suck. It's all going to make sense at some point. As for actual plays, because I thought when I can't record a recap, I at least will update you guys on where we're at. Titan's Call is coming along nicely. I am currently editing episode 13 of 26 episodes in season 1. And we personally, internally said at the team, when we have finished 13 episodes of editing and we're all happy with all 13 episodes, we're gonna release them to the public. Or at least we're gonna agree on a date for Titan's Call's release. So we're very close to actually finalizing that release date. But I want to update you on why it took so long. So I was jobless for 3 to 4 months, basically beginning in January to like April. That was the time I edited Titan's Call because I had the time. But now I found a new job in May, which is a very great job. It's a very cool job. It's a very chill job. And I make some money so that I can actually keep on doing the stuff I want to do. But that also means that I suddenly lost like 20 hours a week to do the editing I wanted to do. So I had to find a new schedule on how to edit Titan's Call. And now I found that groove and found the schedule and found the way to do it. Now we can once again start with the editing process. And that's why I want just to say, as soon as episode 13 of Titan's Call is finished editing, there's 4 more little things that need to be done for Titan's Call to release. That is the trailer and the 3 character episodes that we've done before the incidents of episode 1. That's everything. As soon as everything that's finished, there's gonna be a release date, because then we have one. And then we're gonna start releasing. So I don't want to give you any ideas, put anything out there, because it hasn't worked the last 6 times I did. Let's go with middle of June for the trailer. And then probably 2 to 3 more weeks for the actual episodes. And that's 26 episodes of Titan's Call then. Those are gonna release. Those are gonna come out. Then we have something very special that has been in the works for a long time, and I apologize to our collaborator, Rise of the Rule Lord, that it took so long, but I really want to put this out as well. We have a short mini intermission of Pathfinder content that we've played with the whole Titan's Call crew that Pete from the Rise of the Rule Lord ran us through to show us Pathfinder as a group. And that's gonna come out as well, obviously. It's gonna be, I think, 4-part thing, blah, blah, blah. And after that, something else. Second actual play. I've talked about it quite a few times. You've seen maybe hints on Twitter. You've seen us talking about our second actual play and that we've done recordings. I don't want to talk too much because I don't know. I know that when this episode comes out, there isn't gonna be any hints to what it actually is. But it's Niels' actual play. And it's pretty good. I've talked about Titan's Call quite a few times that it's the best thing I've ever done as a game master, and I think that's still true for me. But as a podcaster, Titan's Call Season 1 is a tech test. There's gonna be audio issues, there's gonna be weirdness in it, there's gonna be baby steps. And I just want you guys to be prepared that while I will hype up Titan's Call to the maximum, I'm also going to be real. It's a baby step process. It was the first time I've done an actual play. It's going to be weird a bit. But the second one, Niels's, has a lot of the tech issues figured out right from the start and works way better. And I hope you will enjoy that as well. I hope that there's not a lot of gap between the Pathfinder thing and that. And there's also a third thing in the works, which I'm not going to talk about at all, but it's going to be a way smaller one. It's going to be way more personalized. And it's going to be one of my favorite universes ever. It's not a self-made universe. It's a franchise that exists already. So yeah, that's all the updates. So now let's get into episode 120 of DoubleDM podcast and talk about creating nail-biting combats. Hey listener, how are you enjoying the show so far? Tell us about it in whatever way you see fit. Go to our social media pages and add us or DM us about your favorite episode of the show. We would love to hear from you on what impact our show might have had on your home games. Or you could review us on your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice message with a 5-star review. And if you want to go above and beyond, bring a friend into the fold. tell them about our show, and refer us to them so they can get a piece of the pie as well. Thank you for listening to DoubleDM and joining us on this incredible journey. So Niels, recently I've been telling you about the boss fight my players had against a Raufa 4, the old white death. Basically a dragon between adult and ancient, kind of challenge rating. He was a little bit stronger than an adult white dragon, and he's a little bit less stronger than an ancient white dragon. But he was very strong. And my players fought him in a, let's say, disadvantageous position, right? Fighting a legendary monster in its lair is never a good idea because it has even more stuff it can use against you.
You mean narratively it's an amazing idea?
Yes. But you get that from a character standpoint, entering a lion's den basically is never a smart idea because that means that the dragon is not only able to attack on its turn and after at least 3 other turns from the characters, but also on initiative count 20, they get to do something even more bad against you.
Yeah, they have the home turf advantage.
And it's great. I love it. But it also means that the fight is even more in favor of this villain, of the monster, of the dragon, of the BBEG, whatever it is for you. And the fight that I had was very close for my players. They had like 2 spell slots left in the entire party. There was 1 feature unused by the fighter because he didn't fail a single saving throw. And the highest HP count that any one of them had was 8.
Yeah, okay.
Combined, they took something like 350 damage or something as a group.
How many players are in your group?
4.
Damn.
All of them were level 11. They leveled up after the fight and then got their rewards, blah, blah, blah. But I was asked actually on Twitter, how do we get these close fights? How do we make fights close? How do we as GMs have tools in our toolkit that allow us to create fights like this one? I'm very much inspired by Blue Lock for the way I'm currently thinking about everything. Quick anecdote, Blue Lock is an anime and manga series about football or soccer. But it's not about power of friendship, we can beat the enemy if we just train together. It's about, I will become the best in the world and all of you are fucking insects on the wall against me.
All right.
And the main character, Isagi, is basically, he's an analytical genius, you could say. And he analyzes stuff. He thinks about how can I repeat stuff? How can I create chemical reactions with my other players? How can I win the game? I'm not the best when it comes to physical capabilities, but I am the best in soccer knowledge. I have the biggest brain basically on the field. I'm the big brain. And he then goes about how to defeat his opponents is to analyze them, find their weak spots and the weapons they use. And then it's a good anime. It's a good manga series. You can watch and read it. I will recommend it. But the main theme is basically of that evolving, and especially how can I make sure that the stuff I just did, that was pure chance and luck and all of the circumstances combined, how can I repeat that? How can I make sure that that happens more often? How can I just made a goal. How can I make 1 goal to 100 goals? How can I make the same goal 100 times more or a similar goal 100 times more? Because that's what we want in the end. We want to not just have stuff happen by chance and luck. We want stuff to happen because we made it so. And that goes for TTRPGs as well. Yeah. In a different sense, how can I build a toolkit that allows me to create these close fights or allows these close fights to happen more often? That's what we will talk about today. So that's the first question for you.
I think to build a toolkit, you first of all need to look at all the tools that you could have or could use potentially. Obviously, you need to have a look at what monsters you could use, what abilities there are, and what environments you want this fight to happen in, and what your players can do, what your players can't do. And then in a combination of all of these, pick out the things that you want to happen and put it into your toolkit or into your toolbox. Pick the right monster for the environment that you want the fight to be in. Adjust the environment according to the monster that is given. That these 2 parts work alongside each other and complement each other, not just there and another monster. It's just they have to work together to make it feel more engaging and more close. Because if the monsters or if the enemy that you chose works with the environment that they have in a meaningful way, it obviously makes the combat a lot harder because it's not just random monster in a random place.
I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. Putting a monster that you're supposed to fight as a group or putting a combat into the right environment allows that combat to actually flourish. Because I can just put a random monster in any situation and say, go for it, monster, do whatever you want. And it does whatever it wants. But it's also not that the environment works for it. And I think that's where it comes in.
Exactly.
Not necessarily that the environment fits, but that the environment works with the monster against the players is a good way to make the combat more hard. But we don't want the combat to be harder. Oh, well, in some case we do. But making a combat harder is the difference between making a combat close, personally.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds confusing at first, but hear me out. Making a combat harder is very easy.
Yeah.
Because I can just bump the numbers of the monster to infinity.
Mm-hmm.
That will be the hardest combat my players have ever faced. A dragon with infinite amount of HP, with plus 27 million on every saving throw. That is an unwinnable fight, and we all know it. Mm-hmm. No one wants to fight that.
Yeah.
But that's the way I make the combat hard. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be hard until my players are dead. But I don't want them to die. Or well, that's one of the first tips. When it comes to character death, it's closely connected to close fights.
Mm-hmm.
Because without character death, you cannot have close fights.
Yeah.
If in your campaign, characters cannot die, and your players know that, why would they ever have these sweats in a combat if they know they cannot die? So the first tip, and it's a big tip, and we can break it down to how to get there, is to make the combat threatening to the players and the characters. It's to make the combat threatening to the player characters, so the players, they are trying to prevent something.
Yeah.
Death, losing of a battle could also be, right? The villain isn't necessarily out to kill the characters, but they're out to activate chaos device number 3. And if they do that, the world ends. Mm-hmm. And even though the characters might not take damage, just one missed attack from the fighter more in their turn would mean that the villain survived one round longer and would have been able to activate the device. That is just as much a close fight than when my players are only at collectively across 4 players at 13 HP. Mm-hmm. That's just as close. So it's not about making sure that the monster or the combat is hard. It's about making sure that this feeling of, fuck, that was close, comes to be.
Yeah.
Making the combat hard gives you that feeling. But it's not the only way.
Yeah. The thing that you just mentioned, the threat or the imminent feeling of threat or immediate threat, is a big thing and something that you want to achieve if you want to make your combats more close. Mm-hmm. And like you just mentioned, it can be your characters dying or the world ending or a village being turned into ashes or something along those lines. It can be a plethora of different things depending on the situation that you are currently in. And that's something that you have to figure out as well, to see what is the threat of this combat that tries to be avoided by this combat or by this situation.
Yeah.
Because that's what you as a player or you as players want to do, kind of, is to avoid threats, either to you, the environment, the world, characters you know, or anything in between.
Yeah.
And making that feeling of, or the necessity of stopping that threat even greater is a great way to enhance the feeling of imminent threat and therefore the urgency of this whole situation. Mm-hmm. And the more urgent a situation is, the more close it feels, at least in my experience. Even if it, by the numbers, isn't necessarily that close, but the more threatening the threat itself is, the more close it feels.
Yeah, I feel like the first step you have to do if you want to make a combat close, is to be very aware of what's at stake. Mm-hmm. That can be, right, death. For example, in my fight, it wasn't just death for my characters or the dragon at stake. It was the whole entire mission my players were on to stop the cult of Tiamat that was at stake. If they had TPK'd there, it wouldn't have just been, oh no, we died. It would have been, oh no, the world is ending because we died. So yeah, first step is be very aware of the circumstances of the combat itself. And we can talk about explicitly combat because that is explicitly what we want to have, close combats. Think about the entire stake situation around it. What are both sides in for? For example, a dragon was hungry. It sounds very simple, right? The dragon was hungry. And they also invaded their bedroom. I don't know what you would do if someone invaded your bedroom without your permission while you were sleeping. But if you're a dragon, you eat the people.
Yeah. Sounds reasonable.
But when you know how all the participants, what they're in for in this combat and what's at stake for everyone involved, you have a visualization of what everyone is gonna do. Because the dragon is not just fighting. This dragon was not just fighting. It was hunting.
Yeah. And this is a big distinction to make between just fighting to, for example, stay alive, or just to wreck to fuck someone up, or to hunt. It's a clear distinction between those. The mindset of the dragon is a completely different one.
Yeah, and just feel like generally none of your monsters in your world are just fighting.
Yeah.
There's a purpose behind their actions. Knowing that purpose gives you a chance to play the dragon better to the best of their abilities in a fight. And if you can play the dragon better to their abilities, they are literally gonna be more dangerous to the characters already.
Yeah.
Because now they have a purpose. This dragon was hunting, which meant that first of all, they would target one creature in the party and knock them low enough to then say, run, give me the satisfaction. Give me the satisfaction of killing you while you flee. And I'm gonna be honest, that's another thing. If the dragon didn't do that, it would have been a TPK. And we also don't want a TPK. We want close combats. We don't want to TPK. We want to have our characters at the brink of a TPK. Yeah. And this is how I did it. This is the biggest advice and the magic behind how I made a close fight happen. I made the dragon have two things. One thing is a clear fighting style. It did what it wanted to do. Second, it had a flaw that was its downfall in the end. Because if it would have been just killing everyone, one after the other, instead of giving them the chance to flee, it would have won the fight. So that's that. And that's the big advice how my combat came to be. But there are more. Obviously, there are more different things. And one other thing I want to talk about is something that all GMs do, or not something that most GMs do, I've noticed. We want to have fun with our friends at a table. It's not fun if the character dies, right? Well, It can be.
But it usually isn't.
Death is fun. I'm gonna be the first to say it. But at the same time, when you're a GM, I know a lot of people have the feeling of, I don't want to kill the character. They put so much work into them. They like the character. I don't want to, right? Everyone has. Sure, some people might not have that feeling, but a lot of people do. And that means you're pulling your punches, probably, with your party. You're giving them more opportunities and more stuff, even though you could have just killed them. And I'm gonna say it the way it is. That's not bad, but it also means that you're not fighting to the best of the ability of the monster or the villain. If you start mitigating that feeling more and more, you're going to have closer fights. If you start to pull less punches with the players, you're going to have closer fights. Because this is something I've not noticed. It's a hypothesis I have. Players always fight to the best of their ability. They want to win.
Yeah.
But the GM doesn't. The GM doesn't necessarily want to win or lose. They just want to portray the monster. Yeah. But that's a different goal. The players fight always to the best of their abilities. They use the best thing, in most scenarios at least.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of not doing the mathematically...
Yeah, I'm not talking about the mathematics behind it. I'm just talking about, right, the players and the characters. The players play their characters always to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
But you as the GM don't. But that also means that there is an, in quotation marks, unfair advantage for the characters when it comes to these combats. Because even though they might not do the optimal thing, they are interested in winning against the monster.
Yeah.
You as the game master are not necessarily interested in the monster winning. And even that single small bias can be the difference between a close combat and a normal easy combat for the players, because you pulled the punches. You said, no, the monster isn't going to use its breath weapon this turn. Why not? Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't the dragon do it?
This is a thing in D&D, most of the rechargeable abilities. If the ability is up, why wouldn't they use it? If it's a big AoE and you only hit one character, okay, I can see that. But if you have an opening to use this ability to its full potential, why the fuck wouldn't you?
Yeah.
These are some questions that you should or could ask yourself in a combat if you want to make it more close. Is why the fuck wouldn't this creature do this right now? Or why would it do this instead? If there is a reasonable explanation behind it, sure, go ahead. But if there isn't, If there's just, that might down my players, go for it. It's just the thing that we want to have, a close fight. If you down 3 players at once and there's only 1 left, but the monster looks pretty hurt, this character now has a choice to make. Just push the ball into the court of the players. Again, giving them the choices that they have to make. Like one standing player now has the choice to make. Do I get my fellow party members back up, or do I try to get this creature and be done with it? This is a gamble that you have to, as a player, then decide. And this is something that makes the fight feel way more close than it might actually be, just because you give basically a moral dilemma to the players during the combat, giving them something else to worry about other than just themselves.
Yeah.
This is a big thing that I've noticed too, or how it can make my fights feel way more close than normal. Just give my players something else to worry about other than just themselves. Being it the state of the other players, the state of the environment around them, the state of other characters, not necessarily in the combat, but being at the lives of characters, NPCs being at stake, or the world. Just giving them something else to worry about just increases the tension, and therefore leads to a more close feeling combat, at least in my experience.
It does. And I think I know why. Because there's a hidden black box right now in the explanation that you gave. It's a very small one, so you don't have to understand the black box actually, because it spits out the thing that you want, and when you put the thing in that you have, you don't need to understand it. But I think the reason behind giving your players more to worry about than themselves in a fight is that leading to closer fights is simply just because players now have to make choices. And not just because they have to make a choice. The reasoning behind the choice is the fun thing. Or the part behind, or the hidden baggage of that choice is the fun thing. They get to decide how the combat evolves. If they decide badly, that is death. But they made the right decision. That's why they survive. That's the hidden meaning behind close combats. It's not that the players are all on 1-digit HP and have no features left. It's that the players think one mistake, one choice different, and we all would have died. The stats are just the visual representation of that.
Yeah.
One mistake. You need to narrow the combat down to all of the different choices your players made. And when you plan the combat, think of points in your combat, in your environment, in your monster that give the players points where they can engage, however they might engage. And that engagement is the crucial part.
Yeah. And you just touched on one thing that I quickly want to interject here is you use the word points, plural, not a single point of failure, but a progression of decisions leading to a failing situation.
That's the fun thing. The single point of failure thing that we've talked about quite a lot so far is in this instance for me completely void. Even if there's only a single point of failure, my players fail because they made the wrong decision. So fucking be it.
Yeah, the thing is, it might feel like one, but all the dice rolls that led to this situation make it not a single point of failure anymore.
Yeah.
It's not without any chance, without any build up to that. It's either you do this, it's either you do this or you fail. It's based on what everything else that you have done so far. What do you do? Do you do this or do you fail? It's not a single point of failure anymore because there is build up to it.
Yeah.
Something led to this moment. And this is the part where it isn't a single point of failure, although it is just a single point of failure.
And once again, kind of combining all of it together for me personally is one thing. You need to let the dice tell the story too.
Yeah.
If your monster has their breath weapon up, it uses it. Cool. We've discussed that part. If the monster has their feature up, they would use it because they are interested in winning as well. So they do. Players all fail the saving throw. You roll the damage and now they're all on 1-digit HP. That's the situation your players have to deal with. And in most games, I'm going to say it the way it is, most games are at least somewhat balanced for situations like these to happen, but not instantly mean death. So your players are on 1-digit HP. In D&D, there's a lot of healing magic that they can now use to push themselves back up. The fighter has second wind. I don't know, the warlock has temporary HP. The Abjuration Wizard has an arcane ward that they can use to mitigate some damage on next attacks anyway. Stuff like that. There's a lot of features, but those features only come out if you actually let the dice do their part.
Exactly.
And now, obviously, that's randomness. We cannot control that. Maybe the dice fall on the wrong side and everyone dies. Maybe the dice fall on the wrong side and everyone survives. That's a fact that you just have to accept. It's a fact that makes TTRPG so much fun. It's a fact you cannot mitigate. So I will say that while I might be able to give you advice on how to make close combats work 95% of the time, at the end, you want to be in those 5% where you don't know what's going to happen, because the dice will tell you what's going to happen. Because that creates the best close for combats, personally. The dice fell very badly for my players in their combat, and that's why it was close. So lifting the mask completely, I could not control how close the combat was. But what I could control were the factors that I had in my hand. The monster, the environment, the stakes at hand. And I can manipulate with those everything I want.
Yeah.
So, for example, my dragon had a lot of different features it could use. For example, it could turn invisible for 1 minute, with greater invisibility, by the way. That's a feature that if your players are not prepared to fight against that, everyone can see that can become a TPK, because a white dragon that deals like 55 damage on average per turn gets 10 turns invisible. So they have advantage on their attack roll. That's a certified death trap.
Yeah.
Because they deal 550 damage in that minute.
On average.
Probably more, because they get advantage.
Yep.
So they have a higher chance to crit. That doesn't look good.
Nope, it sure does not.
How did I create a close combat when the monster was very much set up to TPK? Well, the biggest component in that were my players.
Yeah.
Not the way I did it, but it was the players going, okay, he's invisible. We cannot do anything about that right now. So we just have to find a way. And they had to find a way. There was no, okay, I attack further. You don't see the dragon. You cannot attack it. So they had to find a way. So they asked me personally of stuff they can do. Or not necessarily what can I do, but they asked, okay, can I do this? Can I try that? I'm just going to do that. Maybe that works. And those points those points of can I do this? Does this work? Those are not depicted in D&D or in any rule system, because they're way too specific for the situation you're in. So that's the point where you get to decide. And if you make those decisions, it's rewarding your players when they make the right choice. And that's again where you get to control stuff, where you can make the combat closer. This dragon is unable to be heard as long as it's flying. It cannot make a sound while it's flying, and it's invisible. You cannot see it and you cannot hear it. So what do the players do? My players put a spell, a concentration sickening radiance, in the air, and all hit under it. So the dragon would have to enter the sickening radiance to attack them. I would have never thought of that. And I'm going to be honest, if they didn't do that, they would have died. Because it meant that they can wait the dragon out, at least to some degree. Not all characters were under the sickening radiance, so it wasn't a stalemate for like 10 rounds. It was more some characters that are low are hiding under the sickening radiance to be safe. And that's a smart move. But that's not something that I can think of.
Exactly.
So you have to trust your players to come up with the right ideas against the things you throw at them. But that only happens if you throw stuff at them that is engaging, that creates a situation where they are forced to come up with creative ideas.
Exactly.
And you create those situations by just doing whatever you think is fun and makes sense in the minute. This dragon raided a magic tower. It took a lot of magic items home. I thought to myself, well, yeah, a dragon is hoarding magic items, makes sense. But why wouldn't he use some of them?
Exactly.
So he had a cloak of greater invisibility. Fun.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing. Creating super close combats is not now I don't have them, but in the next one I have the closest fight ever. It's more of a process for me, usually, because you have to kind of train yourself and your players to come up with these creative ideas, because you have to throw stuff at them, but not from 0 to 100. If your players don't know what to think of or how to deal with super close situations or super tense situations, that might lead to a TPK pretty darn quick. Because if you don't have any idea what to do, you just die. But if you ease yourself into those situations by making the combats closer and closer, by adjusting these rules that we've just talked about, with setting the right environment, making the environment work for your monster, and the monster using partially all of their abilities, or even more and more and more each combat. Each monster uses more of their abilities. That creates situations where your players have to come up with creative ideas, some out of the box thinking, or a different preparation phase where they can then prepare for the combat. If something like this is possible in this situation. It all depends on the stakes and the circumstances of the combat itself, if your players can prepare for the combat or not. But if you create tense situations and close situations, and they get closer and closer and closer every time, it creates a space of rewarding critical and creative creative thinking and problem-solving ideas that come up on the fly.
Yeah.
But it's not a skill that you can just switch on. It's something that you have to think of, because every character you play as a player is different than the one that you've played before. They all would act different, and you have to kind of find a way find out how your characters would act in certain tense situations, and regarding at what's at stake, how they would act in that situation regarding what would happen. It's something that you have to figure out slowly, and not just from 0 to 100. You cannot just put them in a tense situation and say, how do you deal with that? It just gets a mess because you don't know.
But that creates a close combat if it comes to it.
Exactly.
So
it does.
It's a weird balancing act of putting your characters in a situation where the players can do stuff and know what they would do or what the character would do, but also at the same time create situations where they don't know what happens. So there is this constant feeling of tension and closeness to the combat, because every point matters. And people can see with everything we've talked about today, every little building block, we never really had a way to say, this is how you replicate that, because it's so hard to replicate close combats.
Exactly.
Because of components of luck, because of components of circumstance, because of components of anything. You can, however, still create a formula in some way. First step, understand the circumstances of the combat. Understand the participants of the combat. Try to understand everything in that combat, the way it works. It's like a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, it's a puzzle.
You have a Rubik's Cube in front of you. Look at it. It has some kind of pattern. And now you need to make sure you understand the pattern so you can then put it together to a state where you want it to. And it's fun. It's not about solving the Rubik's Cube. It's not about understanding everything of it, but it's understanding that the middle dots on every side are fixed. They are fixed to the inner mechanism of a Rubik's Cube. This block is a corner block. It has 3 different colors on its side. So I know where it has to go, because there's only one position where it can go. For every single block, there's only one position it can go. You don't need to know for every block. If you understand for as many blocks as you can, it gives you enough building blocks to then use. So, okay, a lot of these building blocks are my players. How do they fight? Disrupt that. It doesn't have to be right. It doesn't have to be completely obvious that you're making a monster that can kill your players. It can be overt. One of my players likes to throw fireballs around. The dragon wouldn't have fire resistance. Why would it? It never fought a foe with fire damage. Why would it have fire resistance? But do you know what it would have? Evasion. Or it could have. So I gave the monster evasion. And now suddenly when it succeeded on a saving throw, on a dexterity saving throw, it avoided the entire damage of the fireball. Fun thing, a dragon has legendary resistance 3 times a day. He had 3 get out of fireball free cards. Hello? This combination, knowing what my players would do, or what they have done before, finding a way how the monster would counteract that, created a situation where my players now have to go, shit, we need to do something different. Shit, we need to think of something clever. Shit, this monster is actually a foe against us.
Yeah.
That's what you want, right? That's what people want. And now I just gave you a formula to understand what to do. But I hate to say that the formula is counter your players.
Yeah.
But it's one of the many formulas. Another one would be, okay, where are my players fighting? In the lair of a dragon. Okay, so he has lair actions. What would the lair actions of this dragon be? You have suggestions, or more or less the actual lair actions on the stat block. But you can go, no, this dragon would be different. He has different lair actions. And you can once again create layer actions that you think would create better situations. For example, the one I used the most, the layer action I used the most in the combat from the white dragon wasn't the ice shards falling from the sky or falling from the ceiling to hit 3 random characters, or the icy fog that deals cold damage when you're in it. It was the ice wall that blocked off certain paths for the characters. Do you know how hard it is for melee characters to hit a dragon when there's an ice wall between you two? It's literally impossible.
Yeah.
But I used the layer action, the given layer actions. I didn't modify them to counter my players, to do what would be the smartest choice. And I created a close combat because the fighter of the group wasn't able to hit the dragon until like round 7 of the combat.
Damn.
And the dragon didn't care for the fighter because he knew the fighter would only be any kind of valuable in melee to me. So I'm gonna fly. I'm gonna stay out of his range at all times. I'm going to make sure that he is only running around trying to hit me, but never is going to hit me. And then I can focus the spellcasters that actually can deal damage to me on range. I will go into melee to them. This dragon had a tactic. He knew stay out of range of the melees and get in melee range with the casters. That disrupts fights. And disrupting is what I want you to focus on when you create close combats. That's my tip. Disrupt something.
Yeah, creating close combats feels like, or it can feel like a riddle that you have to solve, because that's basically what it is.
Yeah.
And you have to understand how the riddle itself works to adjust all the screws that you want to make it how close you want. And disrupting is basically the big center point of the whole riddle itself. What can you do to disrupt the fight in what way? These are the things that I usually think about when I have a big fight coming up. What can my character do, or what can the enemy of the party what can they do to disrupt the fight and to make it their own? It's like in martial arts, play with the rhythm that you want, not let the rhythm of your enemy dictate your actions. The same is true for enemies in TTRPGs. They want to fight on their own terms. They want to fight in their own rhythm. And this is something to think about. How do they want to fight, and how can you achieve that? And therefore, disrupting everything that the party has maybe done so far in every combat before.
It's fun. You just mentioned something that I thought about yesterday after I was at martial arts practice, at kendo practice. Because kendo as a sport is about killing your enemy. It's what's drilled into us. Kill the person in front of you. Obviously, we're not killing them actually, but kendo isn't a defensive sport.
Yeah.
It's an aggressive attack sport. And how do you kill the enemy in front of you in this sport? Well, you strike at them. But how do you strike at them? In kendo, it is impossible to strike someone if they are the one in control of the fight. You need to get control of the fight.
Yeah.
And that's something that you can think about for every round of combat. At the start of a combat round, when initiative jumps back to the highest number, take a few seconds as a GM to maybe even recap the combat round to your players. But also, with that, figure out who's currently in charge of combat. Who is controlling what is happening to some degree? Who has control over the other side? Is it the players forcing the dragon to escape? Or is it the dragon making the players run around in circles trying to hit it?
Yeah.
Who is in control? And if you know who's in control, and if it's your monster, if it's your players, that's good for the players because they are in control. They get to do the stuff they want to do. And if your monster's in control, it also gets to do what it wants to do.
Yeah, it's basically ask yourself, is my monster in control?
Yeah.
If the answer is yes, how can my monster stay in control? If the answer is no, how can it get in control?
How can it stay in control? No. No, right? But that's exactly what it is. How can my monster stay in control? Or how can it get control? Because that's what it would do. Because
exactly
what everyone that has done martial arts will tell you is that it's mostly about the control. It's about it's about having the upper hand. And that's what you want. Your monster wants the upper hand. So give it features to gain the upper hand.
Yeah. And if it has the upper hand, it can apply that much more pressure than it could be if it is just trying to get control back.
Yeah.
And applying pressure to one side of the combat is forcing them to make decisions that might lead to bad decisions that lead to failure. Just applying pressure creates tense situations where either option seems shit or can seem shit. And then you have to decide between shit 1 or shit 2. You don't necessarily know what shit is better suited for your situation, but you nonetheless have to choose one shitty situation and then make the best out of that situation.
And now I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about the one thing that is on the other side of this whole discussion. How can we make sure we don't kill our players?
Well,
how do we balance a fight to be close, but not necessarily TPK? If a TPK happens, it happens. Nothing you can do about it. Listen to our death episode to figure out how to handle death. But how do we make sure that our combats don't end in TPKs? Especially if we want close combats to happen more often, we don't want them to always be TPKs. Sure, if a TPK happens, that's because the combat was close and the players did a bad decision. But we also want to make combats where they actually have the chance to not TPK. It's very easy to jump over that borderline between close and TPK.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we do not jump that line all the time?
I think a huge part of it is looking at the stakes of the combat itself and a conditioning factor that not every combat that you throw at them is winnable, in quotation marks, that fleeing is an option.
Oh, yeah.
Always.
Yeah. I hate that. Sorry, you can continue in a bit. I hate that advice. fleeing is an option. D&D is a power fantasy. Your players are not gonna flee. I'm gonna shatter the whole realm and burst the bubble for everyone. Players are not prone to fleeing in D&D. Most of them at least not. Even if you tell them to, you can always flee. It's a power fantasy. The whole subconscious is going, I should be able to win this fight because I'm strong. They won't run. Sure, they might at some points run. My players have thought about running, but they never did. And while Niels is right, fleeing is an option, and giving players the option to flee might make them flee, and give you combats don't always have to be to death. Don't bet on your players fleeing. Please,
no,
that's not gonna work.
That wasn't was I.
Yeah, I know, and I know what you were saying, but I know, but I hate the advice. Players can flee because that just implies bet on your players being able to flee. That betting never works. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
The thing is, what I wanted to say with that is having an option for that is one way that you could stop that from jumping rope with TPK and close fight. It's not one that I prefer, but it's one that exists.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I wanted to say with that. Usually, when I want my combats to be close, I don't try to, or I don't make sure, or there's nothing that I can do to make sure other than pulling punches. But when I pull punches, the fight doesn't become that close anymore.
That's the thing. It's the same discussion I had about fudging on the Thinking Critically podcast, I think 2 years ago. It's exactly that. I had this discussion with Danny from Thinking Critically on his podcast about fudging and failure. Great episode, by the way. You can find it somewhere on the Thinking Critically channel. And we were talking about someone saying, so I have a dwarf enemy that focuses one of the characters with a heavy crossbow and rolls a crit. The damage kills the character. Should I fudge the dice? And I no, because you made the decision that dwarf was there, had a heavy crossbow, shot the character. The dice is the chance you were ready to take. And now you weren't ready to take it anymore because it was a 20. You weren't ready to take the dice chance. So why do you set it up to be the chance?
Exactly.
And that's where it is. You don't necessarily have to pull punches, in my opinion. Because, as I said, TPKs are okay. At least if you discuss that with your group in session 0, which you should, by the way. So they know that death and TPKs are an option. It's a simple 2-sentence. Death is an availability here. Watch out for it. I am not gonna pull my punches. You're gonna die. You die in the game. You die. Death is an option. Be prepared that it can happen. I'm not gonna try to kill you, but it might happen.
Yeah, but I won't hold back if that happens.
And that's the way it is. And how you can pull punches is not necessarily in the situation you're in, but before that.
Yeah.
You don't have to pull your punches by adjusting the HP of a monster or the AC or anything, which you can do in certain different other ways, by the way. You can always adjust your combat mid-combat to make it easier so it doesn't become a TPK, but it has to be clever. But there's another way you can do something. My dragon has the invisibility spell and is unheard in flight. 2 information I gave my players before the combat even started. It was their decision to prepare or not to prepare against it. But they knew that this dragon wasn't just an ordinary dragon, but that they were kind of able to cast spells and that they surprised every single one of their prey to the brink of they never saw it coming. And if I hammer that home, my players are at least gonna think about, okay, what do we do about this dragon that seems to be the perfect hunter? What can we do? They could have just probably, prepared see invisibility as a spell. They didn't. But they knew the dragon would be able to turn invisible, or at least had some kind of ace up his sleeve to hide and be unseen in the fight. That information was me pulling my punches with my players because I knew if I didn't give them that information, it would have been a TPK, period.
Yeah, and this is a huge thing, how you can make fights close even though they are set up for a death trap. Give them information, because as we all know, information is power. It's just a thing. The more you know, the better equipped you are to deal with a certain situation. The same goes for combats, obviously. The more you know about your enemy, the better you are prepared to fight it. Even though you might not physically prepared anything, but just knowing what your enemy can do is a huge advantage. And just giving these options, you don't pull any punches or you don't adjust the HP or deal less damage or whatever, but just giving your players options that they can think about or knowledge what the enemy can do to then come up with a strategy around those things is such an amazing thing to do to stop TPKs from happening just because you give them information. If you gave them the information and they still don't act on it, that's on them. You did everything that you said you would. You gave them the information and you didn't pull your punches. If they act on the information, they probably won't die.
Yeah.
There's still a chance because dice and chance, they're still a thing, but the probability of that happening is way lower because they have all the information if they act on it. But if they don't, that's just on them making their life even harder than it has to be.
Yeah, that's how you create close combats. It's a lot. Close combats are a very hard topic to discuss, I feel, and especially a hard topic to give a specific advice on because they're highly situational. They are highly situational and unpredictable.
Yeah.
That's the way they are. That's the way you want them to be. If they are predictable, they're not close. They're calculated, and you don't want that. You want them to be unpredictable. So play into that. Play into the unpredictability of it, but give your players and your monster also, give every participant enough points where they can do the cool stuff they want to do so they can turn the tides of the combat. Because the close combat is, again, not about numbers. It's about that tension of everything played out exactly as it had to for this to work for me. Or it played out exactly not how it had to have. It played out exactly not for me. Both are good. And if your players TPK, but you tell them the dragon only had 5 HP left, they might go, shit. Shit TPK, I'm sad, but also what a fucking amazing fight.
Exactly.
Just another experience under your belt. But that's the important part. Collect experience about close combats by simply building bigger, deadlier combats. Not just by bumping numbers, but by adding that cool feature that you think would make itself great as an addition to this combat. By adding layer actions, by adding legendary actions, one at a time. And with that, you can get a way better feel for how to balance on that edge between close combat and not close combat, and at the same time, close combat and TPK. But you need to balance on that edge. You need to try to make these combats close and dangerous and deadly, because otherwise, you never will be able to figure out your own personal formula for close combats.
Exactly.
That's the lesson of Blue Lock, by the way. Everyone has to make their own formula. So yeah, with that, I think we're finished for today. So came completely full circle like a soccer ball.
Perfect. So with that, thank you all for listening and hear you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DoubleDM. It appears you liked this one. What we had to say and our advice helped you. Why not show us how we helped you in a rating, or even write a review detailing us how we helped? You can do this on the platform that you are listening on right now. It's just a few clicks, doesn't take long, and helps us out. It gets us out there and our advice into more ears of more people. Thanks again for listening and joining us on this amazing journey. Have a great day and hear you on the next one. Bye bye.